his economic capacity is being systematically destroyed by Ukrainian drones. He'll go to jail at best, or he'll die at worst. And so from his perspective, whether it's good for Russia or bad for Russia, he's not going to end the war. He's going to carry on. Well, Putin never likes to admit any kind of fault or weakness. And so, of course, they're having problems in Ukraine. We can all see it with our eyes. And the fact that he's admitted it means that he's having real problems. It's pretty remarkable what the Ukrainians have been able to achieve in terms of blowing up oil refineries. Every day there's a new image of an oil refinery on fire. They've blown up all sorts of logistics connected to the war in Crimea, oil terminals in the Baltic. And there's no way that Putin can get around it. His economic capacity is being systematically destroyed by Ukrainian drones. Now, that doesn't mean that he's going to fold. It doesn't mean he's going to capitulate. It doesn't mean he's going to negotiate for peace. It just means that he's got a problem. And I suspect the next thing that will happen is some type of major escalation. What could that look like? It could look like intense bombing campaigns of Ukrainian cities, civilians. It could look like massive new recruitment of Russian soldiers, perhaps a general conscription where more Russians are trying to rush across the border. And of course, they'll be killed as they approach the border because the Ukrainians, they basically have a kill zone at the border. But I don't think that we're going to see anything other than Putin escalating, because that's all he knows how to do. If Putin decides to do a general conscription, so a widespread draft, it will affect people much differently than what has been happening before. Before, Putin was basically saying to poor people around Russia that you can make many years' salary and just in a sign-on bonus by going to war. And in doing so, he was able to recruit various poor people from all sorts of far-flung regions in Russia to join the war effort. Most of those people have died, but it hasn't affected the general population. And in fact, Putin is very keen on not affecting the general population because that's his way of avoiding uprising. If he's unable to recruit more soldiers through money, and there's two reasons why that might be happening. One is they don't have as much money anymore. And two, they've probably burned through all the people who were stupid enough to take the money and go die in Ukraine. But they still need soldiers. The front line is being depleted. And if they can't do it through money, then they have to do it by just forcing people to go and fight. And if they do that, that's called a general conscription or draft. And if they do that, then it affects people much more broadly. And then they have a problem, which is that people will be angry. That doesn't mean that the anger doesn't mean Putin is not going to do it. But what it means is that then he's got to repress the population even further. So, for example, we already see this happening in the way in which Russia has limited the use of Telegram, their main messaging app, because he doesn't want people all gossiping with each other about standing up to the government. Putin has taken precautions by getting rid of mobile internet in Moscow and St. Petersburg because he doesn't want people talking on their phones. That's a good way he believes that he'll end up being killed. And so, and by the way, the other thing which could happen with a general conscription is that people will try to leave the country. And so I would imagine that if they do a general conscription, they'll do it in conjunction with effectively closing the borders so that young people can't leave the country. And so all of this has the potential for an uprising, but I don't think that if you're betting on probabilities that that's the thing that's going to happen. I think the most likely thing that happens is that he just makes life immeasurably worse for everybody in the country. People get angry about it, but don't do anything about that anger. Anything could trigger protests around Russia. If you remember the Arab Spring, it was all started because a fruit seller in Tunisia set himself on fire, and then that led to the overthrow of the government. The problem is that it's impossible to predict what the event is that could trigger an uprising. It's impossible to know when that might happen, how that might happen. And so we're as much in the dark as Vladimir Putin is in the dark about this type of thing. All he knows is that he's kind of getting boxed in from all sides. On one side, he's losing soldiers at a rate that he needs to replace them with. And if he replaces them with a general conscription, that creates anger. On the other side, then he has to put pressure on those people not to express their anger in a way that threatens his power. And that could either have the effect of suppressing them, or it could have the effect of provoking them. Nobody knows what could happen and how it could happen. But of course, the more pressure there is in this dictatorship, the more likely it is at some point that the whole thing blows. But as a betting man, I wouldn't bet anytime soon that Putin is going to lose power, because he's been pretty good at holding on to it for the last 26 years. There's always a chance, but the question is, how high is the probability? And I think the probability is very low, specifically because when Yevgeny Prigozhin from Wagner did his version of a revolt, he ended up getting killed in a very public way a couple months later. And the Russian authorities made sure to have a video of his plane crashing so that everybody has an image in their mind of this plane containing the revolt leader and his comrades all falling to their death. And they want everyone to know that if they try to organize something similar, they too will die. That's the way in which the mafia operates, and that's the way in which the Kremlin operates. Russia is a very large country, and being a very large country, that gives them certain strategic and military benefits. The main military benefit is that being so large is a very hard country to take over. It's a hard country to invade because there's so much territory and so much territory to try to control. And that has given them a big advantage over many centuries. However, being such a large country has now created a disadvantage, because as such a large country, there's a lot of different assets and infrastructure and businesses that operate in all different parts of the country. And all of those assets and oil and refineries and so on need to be protected. And the Ukrainians are now taking advantage of this large landmass and the fact that it's hard to protect everything to hit all these oil refineries. And it makes even easier for the Ukrainians when Putin sees that they're hitting targets inside Russia. He gets scared for his own personal safety. He brings in more air defenses into Moscow, and they become even more exposed, the other places that are no longer defended. And we can see that on our internet every morning. When I wake up, I see another oil refinery burning on fire because it's been hit by Ukrainian drones. They've gotten very good at drones. The Russians have become very bad at defending their economic targets. And as a result, Russia's economy is really being hammered by Ukraine right now. I don't think that Putin is going to end his war under any circumstances, because if he ends the war, then the Russians will say, why did we go to war in the first place? What did we gain from this war? Oh, by the way, who started it? You started it. And you started it, and we've lost 1.5 million young men. Another 1 million have left the country. The economy is in a dire state. Our industry has been destroyed. Our military has been hollowed out. This is your fault, Vladimir Putin. That's the message. And therefore, you should leave power. And by the way, in Russia, when somebody leaves power, there's no elegant exit. There's no Putin presidential library that he's going to retire to. He'll go to jail at best, or he'll die at worst. And so from his perspective, whether it's good for Russia or bad for Russia, he's not going to end the war. He's going to carry on. We're in a war of technology, and Ukraine has mastered at the moment the war of drone technology. However, it changes every day. And at some point, I would imagine that some countries, I don't know whether it's going to be Russia or other places, will figure out how to stop the drones from coming in, at which point Ukraine loses this enormous competitive advantage. I don't think that point is here now, and I don't think that Russia necessarily is going to be the country to discover countermeasures for drones. And in the meantime, they just keep on getting hit harder and harder and harder. And so for a country that was once viewed as a superpower, and they're viewed as a superpower because of their strong military, they can no longer be viewed as such. They're not a superpower because they don't have a strong military. And without a strong military, they kind of have nothing, because the economy is not very big. The size of the Russian economy is smaller than the country of Italy, smaller than the state of New York. And so it really does put Russia in a very sort of small box as far as world policy is concerned. The main purpose of Crimea was to elevate Putin. He invaded or illegally annexed Crimea in 2014 as a way of cementing his power. And the Russians loved him for it, and it was a pretty bloodless situation. Not very many people died in the annexation of Crimea. So, of course, it's a symbol of Putin's power, of Russia's resurgence, and all sorts of other stuff. If the Ukrainians continue on this path of isolating economically and with resources Crimea, so they don't get the energy, the fuel, the water that they need to run it, then people will have to leave. And if people leave, then it becomes a harder place to hold on to. Having said all that, I think that it's a much different proposition destroying fuel plants in Crimea than it is for the Ukrainians to take it back. Ukraine doesn't have a huge military. It requires many soldiers to take over any place. The Russians, of course, fortified Crimea many times over, so I don't think it's as simple. The Russians are all going to leave and just hand the keys back to the Ukrainians. I think it's going to be, no matter how desperate the situation is in Crimea, the Russians aren't going to give up on that. Well, I think that the Ukrainians have accomplished something very significant, which is that they've created enough pain so that there's a possibility of having some type of agreed or unspoken agreement where the Russians won't hit Ukrainian civilians and the Ukrainians won't hit Russian economic targets. I think that that's probably, or I should say that's a very real possibility. I don't think that any of this is going to lead to a peace agreement per se. I think the war will carry on. But if you're able to create such incredible penalties on an enemy, like the Ukrainians are doing to the Russians, it does put you in some type of negotiating position to say that if you continue to hit our civilians, we're going to continue to destroy your economy. And that's a pretty compelling argument.